We're live here back at World Series News headquarters, and Simon is standing by for a further update. And thank you for everyone who's been tuning in, sharing, liking and commenting on this massive week of news here. It's been kind of a renaissance at World Series News. We've had an enormous amount of support, and you're responding in ways of understanding what it is we're trying to do here, and that is taking the news that is not being reported in the mainstream, and certainly not with any of the amount of detail that Simon is providing for us. And this workload is extensive. Simon is at it 18 hours a day, and we're doing the same here at World Series News, trying to understand, disseminate and make sense of what is going on. And you're going to be very pleased with the update that you're going to receive today from Imran Khan, because you're going to see now that it has taken the Twitter world by storm. Even Cat Stevens, also known as Yusuf Islam, has weighed in favour of Imran Khan. We'll get to that in a moment, but there's a lot more to talk about in this show today. We're also going to discuss what happened in the Moscow meeting between, you've got Turkey, Syria and Iran, what's happened over there. And this is the other side of the World Economic Forum. This is the Great Eurasian Partnership that is going on. We're also going to talk about what's happening with George Santos, the Republican in New York, as the Biden family has been exposed, and CNN reporting on this information. Very, very interesting. That's what's happening. Title 42 expires. What's going to happen with the border crisis in the United States? Simon will be able to report on that as well, and explain in great detail, right to constitutional law, an argument and explanation of what's going on. So this is the place where you want to be to get that detail in a semi-formal environment. And I'm going to bring Simon in right now, and we're going to get on with this big show. And please, if you can, share and continue to follow, because as this goes on, there is nowhere else where you're going to get the understanding of what it is, and then you can get out to your politicians all around the world and ask them the very serious questions, and we can start to hold them to account. Big ambitions? Well, no other way to do it. Simon, welcome back.
Hi there, Jason. So we have lots of news from both the United States and from Pakistan and Moscow, so it should be a pretty interesting show this evening.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for making the time. And I know that the workload is astronomical, but it's what we love to do, and to bring it to people, and hopefully we can establish a better understanding around the world. I was quite pleased when some of my Pakistani Australian friends commented, and publicly and privately to me, that the work that we're doing on Imran Khan, they agree 100% in the explanation, Simon. So it means that there's something else going on out there, that the people are being fed, that is not exactly what is the sentiment on the ground. I want to start quickly, but before we get into it, this is a tweet from Yusuf Islam, or Cat Stevens, and on the screen you can see it there. He tweeted that Pakistan has for years been allowing corruption to flourish in the shadows. Imran Khan has risen to speak out against it, and we are forced to watch the charade continue as he is locked up. Set him free. And that post has had almost 800,000 impressions at the time that I found it. That's pretty impressive, coming from the pop superstar of the 70s, Simon. Now, I might have lost Simon.
That's undoubtedly true. That's undoubtedly true. But part of the problem that the IMF has been complaining about is that Pakistan does actually have a very weak tax base. And so government spending has increased greatly in the last 20 years, but really their revenues haven't kept up at all. So, when you come to try and rein that in, and you've got a lot of people who are now in rather privileged positions, it's
having a few problems there.
You suddenly realise that you just can't sustain that financially, and then they all hire lobbyists to try and protect their special interests.
So Talking about what's happened now with Imran Khan. Now, yesterday on the show, we talked about how he was taken in by Pakistani intelligence. Is he still being held in that situation? There's been other tweets where people are wondering if this is, in fact, an assassination attempt or a fear. There's another tweet here. There's growing fear that Imran Khan might be killed or assassinated while in custody. Imran Khan expressed this concern to the judge in charge of the court today. Where is he currently being held?
Right. So I don't personally know exactly where he's being held right now. He claimed when he finally got to meet with his lawyers just minutes before the hearing that he was presented at today that he had been moved at 3 a.m. Now, what was significant about the hearing today is it wasn't in a regular courthouse. They basically turned the location where he was being held into a room for one day. He wasn't allowed to meet with any of his political subordinates or his lawyers before the hearing. The lawyers immediately complained, and the judges, who had literally been driven to what was called a police guest house, they adjourned the hearing to allow him to speak with his lawyers. And in the end, he was actually remanded for 8 days. And this wasn't even in relation to what he was arrested for. This was in relation to a previous case. In terms of the El Qadir Trust case against him, the National Accountability Bureau said that they needed further time to gather their documents and get their case ready to put it before the judges. Mr. Khan's barrister, when he came out from the hearing, which had been unsuccessful, effectively, as far as they were concerned, said that Imran Khan had told him that in addition to being moved location at 3 a.m., so he had had very little sleep, that he wasn't provided with a bed. Bear in mind, this was a man who had been prime minister of the country for 4 years. He wasn't given any food overnight. And so he also claimed that he'd been experiencing heart palpitations. Now, immediately after he was arrested yesterday, supposedly he was driven to a medical center, and a panel of doctors from 2 prestigious hospitals ran some blood tests on him and gave him a physical examination, just so that there was a baseline determination for his state of health. What I personally found extraordinary about that is, he was a 70-year-old man who'd been physically assaulted and dragged down the street by about 50 police officers, thrown into the back of an armored police vehicle, and supposedly he didn't have elevated blood pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not 70 years old, and I know if that happened to me, my blood pressure would be pretty elevated. So either he was doing some pretty Zen meditation whilst he was bouncing around in the back of the police van, or they didn't take their readings very carefully. But being serious, though, there is widespread concern that has been expressed by his political party that he will either be killed and or tortured whilst in detention. And he's now going to be in detention for at least a week. Now, they didn't set a deadline on that. They just said that he had to be represented to the court on the 17th. So obviously his attorneys will request bail on that occasion. There have been some kind of like absurdities that have occurred during the day as well. So the secretary of his political party went to the Islamabad High Court in order to file a petition to try and get his boss out of jail. And he was arrested at the court. He is now in detention. Mr. Fawad Chowdhury, who's a very, very charismatic figure, along with Mr. Imran Khan, he dodged being arrested for about 12 hours during the course of the day and was finally arrested at the Supreme Court of Pakistan, where his petition for Mr. Khan to be released was rejected by the court staff without it even getting before a judge, on the grounds that Mr. Khan, who's already in jail, hadn't personally signed the paperwork, which was absurd because obviously he had a whole team of lawyers who were authorized to sign on his behalf. So that was absurd. That got refiled and supposedly will now be considered, but it hasn't been scheduled on the docket for the court yet. There are reports all day long of Mr. Qureshi, who is the he was the foreign minister up until April of last year, a very, very distinguished, highly regarded diplomat, that he had been arrested. Then he said that he hadn't. Then there was another report that he had been arrested. Now he's put a deny out saying that they appear to be trying to arrest him, but he's literally kind of like being ferried from location to location. So you've got the ex-foreign minister is effectively on the run. Then you had two other senior party officials, one ex-chief minister and one ex-state party chairman, both distinguished members of the PTI leadership, and they've been arrested. So at least four of the senior figures of the party that Mr. Khan is the chairman of have been rounded up by various police forces who obviously are all acting in coordination. And it's quite extraordinary. It's like, Morrison, Joyce, and Dutton and Hanson, for example, all being arrested on the same day in Australia, or in America, Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Biden all being arrested,
Yes.
whilst in opposition. I mean, these are big figures in Pakistan, and in the international media, they're really not getting the attention that they deserve because everyone is focused on the charismatic ex-playboy, famous cricketer in the form of Mr. Khan. But domestically, these are household names, but particularly Fawad Chowdhury, who's very, very prominent in social media. He does occasionally get carried away, which has caused a bit of trouble for him. But he's a kind of Trump-like figure, a bit kind of larger than life. And so, it remains to be seen now whether or not there are more detentions next few days. But what we should just cover is what's happened during the course of the day. So we've seen other cities where these Section 144 notices have been issued, which essentially doesn't implement martial law, but it gives them the right to do so initially for 30 days, so they can be renewed. And that also bans any protest or even a gathering of people for like a wedding or a birthday party. No more than 4 people can get together. So it's pretty much like the Australian COVID lockdown.
Yes. Yes.
You can't go to somebody else's house, can't have a birthday party or a wedding or a funeral with more than 4 people. And the internet has now been shut down for a day and a half across most of Pakistan. Initially, it was just the social media that was shut down, particularly in the form of Twitter, but also some of their domestic social media apps. And then they just went the whole, because people were finding obviously ways around that, and just emailing each other and stuff, and setting up, like calling trees. And now we're at the point where the whole internet has been shut down, except the military circuits. Now that makes things difficult for the police, but I guess they're just using their their CB radios and their walkie-talkies. But it's going to have a devastating impact upon the economy if this lasts for very long, because already the Chamber of Commerce is saying, look, people basically can't use the local equivalent of Amazon for ordering like home deliveries.
Yes.
And at the same time, foreigners are being told, stay in your home, be careful, because we're at the point now where the police are not only using tear gas, but they are actually firing live rounds. And, the numbers are unreliable, but at least 4 people are confirmed dead. Over 88 have gunshot injuries, and the hospitals in many major cities have been putting out calls, particularly for A positive and AB positive blood, which is in short supply. So obviously there's a lot of people turning up with traumatic injuries to the emergency rooms of the hospitals. The tactic that seems to be being done is the police, who are obviously all in riot gear and have been, issued weapons with live ammunition, not just rubber bullets, but proper, shoot to kill type ammunition. They're just blocking major intersections, so that if either spontaneous or organized protests try and come through the main thoroughfares, they pepper them with tear gas and just shoot randomly into the crowds. There are scenes of a large number of women participating, which, as I expressed before, is exceptional in Muslim society. Now, there was an organized attempt to do this when Imran Khan organized one of his grand marches, where they walked from one big city to another big city. And on those occasions, the police and government not only declared them illegal, but they also used shipping containers to block thoroughfares, in order that the vehicle, obviously they didn't expect Imran Khan to walk like 200 kilometers. So he was basically almost like in a parade with lots of vehicles, and people who were sick or who fainted and stuff, they'd throw them onto a bus and drive them part of the way. So they don't seem to be using those tactics, because there aren't big organized demonstrations at the moment. But there does seem to be a general desire on the part of the population to do large-scale demonstrations, but one, they've been ruled illegal, and 2, people are being shot at. So as I was saying, when they organized these past marches, what they did is they asked for the mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters of serving army and police officers. Actually, when I say officers, I mean, like lieutenants, captains, and majors, to join the processions, so that their relatives in the police forces, which are predominantly men, wouldn't order the law enforcement and deployed army forces to fire on the crowds for fear of hitting their own relatives. So they basically wanted to use the army officers' wives as voluntary, and I emphasize that word, voluntary human shields. Like they weren't being tied to tanks or buses or something. They were asking people to voluntarily participate. So that really enraged the leaders of the army. They really were angry about their female relatives being put at risk. And that's one of the things that has turned the military in part against Imran Khan. Now, he's criticized the chief of the army staff, and he's also alleged that a serving major general was involved in the close-run assassination attempt of him. And unfortunately, that didn't split the general staff. They very much coalesced around the person who was accused. And so that's really set the leadership of the army against him. They've also been involved in negotiating with the Chinese, because the Chinese have been very concerned about terrorism attacking the people that they've got supervising their Belt and Road investments. And so the chief of the army staff has actually been on what, on the face of it, appear to be diplomatic missions to several countries recently. So those countries obviously have been accepting of that and realise the dominance of the Pakistani military in the political sphere as well. And so far, we're really not seeing very much resistance from any other foreign countries. They're just calling for, peaceful demonstrations as opposed to, burning stuff Sri Lankan style, which was, a true attempt at revolution, though they didn't manage to overturn all of the members of the parliament, which has left things very much as they were in Sri Lanka, though people had great aspirations. Those were largely thwarted. And, who knows whether or not elections will even occur in October this year, as they had tentative agreements to do. It looks like, that could be delayed, because they'll claim that the financial situation is worse, that they haven't been able to finish local censuses or redistricting because of the danger to the election commission workers. They're going to find a dozen reasons for not holding elections in October and dragging it all the way out until the last possible moment, which I believe is May of next year. Because obviously Imran Khan was removed by a vote of no confidence, and a replacement government was put in place as opposed to immediate general elections. That was part of the legal disputes with the Supreme Court as to whether or not he could avoid the vote of no confidence by calling a general election, which he tried to do. And the Supreme Court said that no, he couldn't avoid the vote of no confidence. So he was actually removed from office before there was a general election.
Yes.
So now the governing coalition, who ousted him, they are serving out the remainder of his term, which was due to go until next year. So there is a deadline for elections. But as we've seen with the local elections that were supposed to have been held within 90 days, they're finding excuses for those to be delayed, not for within 3 months, but for 8 months. Right. So going back to the female participation, I mean,
yes,
your average person who watches BLM protests or COVID protests or anything like that, they expect to see a breakdown of kind of 50-50. But if you watch videos of political rallies, or you see how people are ordered in the mosques, or how people are ordered at state events, if there aren't officially Western representatives there, it is normally very much a society segregated by sex. Even in the mosque, you'll have a women's area and a man's area. And at the public events, you'll have the women all in this room and the men all in the other room. And that's even been seen at events that Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, has attended. I mean, people were shocked when he went to visit various mosques that all the men were at the front and all the women were at the back. So when you actually see 3 generations of women, and I mean literally like daughters, mothers and grandmothers, all brightly dressed, but mingling with non-family members in street protests, it really, really is exceptional. I think the government of Pakistan has become very sensitive to that, because there's been lots of videos of women being grabbed by armed riot police when they haven't been throwing rocks or fighting with sticks or shooting or anything like that, literally just screaming abuse at the police.
Yeah.
And so now we've seen quite a few women police officers, albeit unarmed, not wearing riot gear, that they've actually been coming from behind the riot police, and 2 or 3 local police women constables wearing either tan or black headscarves have been grabbing the women, so that literally the men don't lay hands on them, because that's been causing a lot of social outrage. But then,
Yes.
once they're out of eyesight and behind the police lines and into the police arrest vehicles, God knows what happens to them from that point on. So that's where we're at with society in Pakistan. It is very, very fraught situation. Though I would say at the moment there aren't millions of people on the street simply because it's dangerous. Now, the PTI have called for big demonstrations at various consulates all over the world, and I note that you on your Twitter feed and possibly on your Facebook had shared the information about I think 3 or 4 protest locations
Yes.
over today and tomorrow in Australia. What some people may be familiar with is the kind of big prayer day, like for many Christians going to church on Sunday morning. The big event in the Muslim weekly calendar is the Friday evening prayers.
Yes.
And so the PTI, which is after the close of the regular business day. So the PTI have called for large-scale demonstrations to be held on May the 12th. So that's going to be a real big test to see how many people just flip the bird to the government, and despite the orders saying no groups of more than 4 people, we actually see millions turn out in all of the major and minor cities across Pakistan. Because if all the forces have been brought into, the million plus population cities, as we've seen in France, a common tactic is to say, right, we're not going to fight with the riot police and get shot in Paris and Lyon and Bordeaux and Toulouse, for example, with the Yellow Jackets. And we're going to go to all the towns that say have populations of 50,000 people. And we're going to have demonstrations in 100 places rather than big demonstrations in 10 places.
Yeah. Interesting. The story continues to expand, but as you've explained, it may not be as big a protest as we expected. The internet has been taken down in Pakistan, and Imran Khan will be held in custody, if it appears, for another 8 days, as there are fears that he may be taken out and assassinated, with calls from people such as Cat Stevens or Yusuf Islam that the corruption in Pakistan is rife, and this is not much more than a cover-up.
Unless they're going to do a flat-out military coup like Burma/Myanmar, and just say, we don't care, we're going to shut down the internet for 3 months. I mean, it will have a massive impact upon the economy if it's even shut down for a week. So there is some, the government doesn't want to lose the entire private business sector against them. It's one thing losing some university students or losing some housewives, and it's another thing if the entire economy goes into meltdown, and every single business owner says this is nuts and we're against you. So what we're seeing now may be exactly as they intend for a circuit breaker, but that it can't be maintained in a long term. I mean, look at what Macron has done in France. He's gave a speech to the country and said, "Give me 100 days." So I mean, we'll see if they try and come up with a scheme like that. But really, at this point, all they can say is, we still intend to have elections in October, and you've got to let the judicial process play out. Now, it is true that Imran Khan and his party in government did try and prosecute many of the current government members. So there is a certain element of tit for tat. Now, what was ironic today is when Imran Khan was denied bail, both the ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Sharif, who's now resident in London, and the current Prime Minister were summarily acquitted found innocent of corruption charges against them. So the Prime Minister before Imran Khan and the current Prime Minister were acquitted today, whilst the former Prime Minister is being held in prison. I mean, that's how complicated Pakistan politics are. And you've got to bear in mind that the government is a coalition of 11 parties, and the PTI is also allied with another couple of parties. So it's not even like 4 or 5 political groups like in Australia, or 4 or 5 like in Britain. You're dealing with 14 or 15 political parties.
At the end of the day, who would want to be in politics in Pakistan? And yet here it is that the national hero Imran Khan decides to fight for his country and all of his and suffer the consequences.
What we discussed off air previously, and why the Saudis stopped giving so much support to the current government. The answer is a lot of people, because it gets you immunity from prosecution, and most of the economy, or a good half of it, is state-run. So there's enormous opportunities for patronage. And so, incredibly, despite being only the 5th largest country and being far, far, far down on the economic totem pole, Pakistan has the largest government cabinet, 77 government ministers. So, we say that who would want to be a Pakistani politician? But the answer is a lot of people, because you get very rich from doing it. Much like being a politician in America, where they go in worth $2 million, and then you see someone like Dianne Feinstein, who seems to have mental problems and has just been suffering for months of shingles. But she went in worth a couple of million. Now, supposedly with her husband, she's worth $220 million. Speaker Pelosi with her husband is worth over $500 million. So
on the public payroll.
Yeah, well, it's not just being on the public payroll. It's because they're immune from insider trading rules, and they find out about contracts for IT for 1 million computers for some government department, or for an order for 10 satellites, or an order for 1 million new rifles for the army, and they buy those shares 3 or 4 days before it goes public. And double or triple their money.
It's an injustice that it shows that it's a big club and you ain't in it. We're going to change tact and move on to a new story. We're going to cross to the US in just a moment. I want to play a clip for those that may not have seen it on a previous show. And it's a young lady in Pakistan who removes her headdress in disgust and is taken away by the police. It's only short, and we'll be right back to head to the US here with Simon on World Series News. And we're going to cross it right now, Simon. Let's go to the US, and it's all happening. The first thing I think we should talk about is Title 42, ending at 11:59 p.m. Is it this evening your time or tomorrow?
It's on the 11th of May, so that's tomorrow night, my time.
Okay, so we're approximately 27 hours away from that happening. This is a very big story, of course, because the Biden administration is being caught in two positions here. One, whether it's going to completely open the floodgates by going back to Title 8, or pretending that it's doing some great work, but they've been caught out, haven't they?
Well, there's reports that there's up to 1 million people approaching the Mexico-America border. Title 42 was a device put in place to turn away people because they didn't have the facilities to COVID test them all. So that's only existed for the last 3 years. The previous regulation that they're reverting to, that Biden had said during the 2020 presidential campaign that he would never use, is called Title 8. Now, the problem with Title 8 is it's riddled with exceptions. And so if people are minors, or if they can establish that they have a genuine fear of violence for any number of reasons, then they may still be released pending formal immigration court hearings. And that's what people had previously been relying upon. There was already a 3-year backlog of people being given a piece of paper saying, okay, you can reside in the United States, but in theory, you can't work. They're not eligible for any form of official public welfare, so they're rendered homeless. Then they were getting a court date 3 or 4 years out, but there was no known address for these people. So they wouldn't even be able to tell them like what courthouse to go to in 3 years. It would just be like, contact us in 3 years and we'll tell you what courthouse to go. But now if people didn't contact them, then they basically were in the wind. And so it would appear that the Border Patrol have been told that they can do what's called safe street release, which literally is, if you get the chance to detain people, take their fingerprints, ask them their name, which may indeed be false. Ideally, do a biometric scan of their iris, which is deemed more reliable than grubby fingerprints, and then dump them onto a street corner, with it up to them to get a bus, train, or plane somewhere. I mean, the whole thing has become completely absurd. Michael Yon, the well-known immigration journalist, he declared a broken arrow situation, which people may remember the movie Broken Arrow with John Travolta. In that context, that was the loss or accidental release of a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Okay. The phrase that people more commonly associate is that you're in a fire base, an army camp, and the enemy are inside your perimeter and you're being overrun. So you have to call in artillery fire on your own location whilst your men shelter in bunkers in order to try and kill everybody on the surface. So you'll remember the end of the movie Platoon. They declare broken arrow, and then they specifically call in fire on their own location. And the senior officer has to specifically state for the record over the radio, I know I'm calling on fire on my own location. This is not a map reading error. And you have to do this in order to have any chance of any of us surviving. And, there's a severe process to that kind of emergency signal. So when he did that, he basically was saying, we are going to be overrun, literally, like millions of people just pouring across the line. And that would actually seem slightly melodramatic, but when you analyze the situation as a cool observer, it appears to be justified, because they're sending 1,500 what was initially described as army. Then today we were told that actually they were just members of the Defense Department, so they could literally be secretaries with clipboards who normally work in an office and are going to be handling paperwork. Then they've scrounged together another 1,000 office workers from the Department of Homeland Security. But there was a presentation, which I'll be able to link to the recording of this later, from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who is the umbrella organization that includes Customs and Immigration Services and the actual armed uniform Border Patrol. The immigration people you see at the airports have blue uniforms, and the Border Patrol people have green uniforms and baseball caps, right? And so he was saying that the immigration system is broken. He blamed Congress for failed attempts to reform it going back 2 decades. He blamed the Trump administration, and he said that they hadn't been given enough money. They had only hired an additional 1,000 employees recently. They were still being trained. Basically, it was everybody's fault apart from himself, despite the fact that he's been in office for 2.5 years. And yet, there have been attempts by Republicans to impeach him in the House of Representatives, but they're certain that they won't get the necessary votes in the US Senate to actually remove him from office. So that's just been a lot of political grandstanding. But he said a couple of extraordinary things. He said, we're going to face very difficult circumstances in the next few weeks, because according to him, they don't have the money, they don't have the legislation, and they don't have the staff. So like an absolute, we are guaranteed to fail situation. And then in addition to the hundreds of thousands of people that they're anticipating, the statement that really hasn't been picked up by the media, though I flagged it, was he said not once but twice that according to estimates by his agency, there are currently 20 million displaced people in the hemisphere. Now, when he said hemisphere, he didn't mean United States of America and Canada. He means the Mexican border south.
Yes.
And there aren't that many people, frankly, in Brazil or Argentina or Chile. So we're basically talking from, basically from the northern border of Brazil to the northern border of Mexico. 20 million people. Now, do you think that they're all trying to emigrate to Guatemala or Honduras? No, they're all trying to come to freaking America. So that's the equivalent of 6.5%, 7% of the US population that the Secretary of Homeland Security say is like on the move now.
Yes.
That's like an astronomical number. And that doesn't make any provision for people, as has been reported from Venezuela and Panama by Bill Beguin and Michael Yon and many, many other journalists, where you've got people flying into countries that don't have any visa restrictions. So you've got people flying in from the Republic of the Congo in Africa, and which is a hub for Africans to go to and then fly to Central America. And then it would appear to be tens of thousands of relatively affluent Chinese whole families coming in because they perceive that this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And unlike the very poor Central American and Black people, that they're being ferried in vehicles and on horseback because they've got more financial resources. But it's costing them $50,000 a family to be presented to the US border. Now, we've seen allegations today that the Texas National Guard has been deployed to the border, which is only a fraction of the overall border, and that they were literally physically throwing migrants back into the river. Now, they were supposed to be commenting on that as to whether that was legal or not. He had with him the acting director of Border Patrol and the immigration specialist from the Department of Justice today to address that issue. and instead they took very, very few questions, and those people didn't actually speak. But it's interesting that there do actually appear to be provisions within the US Constitution in emergency circumstances to allow not only individual states to take action that would otherwise be done by the federal government, but that could actually join together and form a grouping. And so we're at the point now where if states' own constitutions allow them to do that in emergency circumstances, that you could effectively see a fracturing of, quote, these United States. Now,
yes,
I'm going to read you just a paragraph. This is in the US Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3. So Section 10 is powers denied to the states. Clause 3 are acts that require the consent of Congress. But as usual, particularly with regard to COVID legislation, when your human rights get thrown out of the window for 3 years at a time, that's, whether it's in Australia, Britain, or in Canada, it's always due to a clause that starts with the word but or unless. So in the case of the American Constitution, it says in that particular part that I've already referred you to, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war, unless, always the unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Now, when it says compact with another state, they mean state like Texas, Florida, Arizona, because they then specify or with a foreign power, okay, by which they mean another country like Mexico or Canada. All right? Yep. So clearly, as of today, we're in a state where Texas and Arizona and California are in imminent danger. As of Friday, the invasion may well be underway, bearing in mind that that is a term that the British Home Secretary, old Suella Braverman, otherwise known as Cruella after 101 Dalmatians, has specifically said that Britain was being invaded.
Yeah.
So if Britain was being invaded with 50,000 people a year, what do you call it when you've got 50,000 people a day?
Yes.
Okay. So Harrison Smith of InfoWars was sent this information. He kindly reposted it because I must admit I'm not intimately familiar with the Constitution of the state of Texas. But this is a provision that Greg Abbott doesn't seem to have relied upon because he's simply deployed members of the National Guard, and indeed they did appear to be unarmed, which is an unpleasant feeling for them. You'd have thought they'd at least have been given pistols holstered. If you're going to be manhandling people, it's potentially quite a dangerous situation. But in the Texas Constitution, Article 4, Section 7, as I'm reliably informed, it states regarding the Commander-in-Chief of Military Force, he, meaning the governor, it's amazing that hasn't been changed to he/she at this point, or he/she/77 other possible genders, shall be Commander-in-Chief of the military forces of the state. So once again, state does specifically mean state Texas, not the country, except when they are called into actual service of the United States. Now that is the provision, I think it's, I can't remember which title it is off the top of my head. It's where the National Guard, which are done state by state, as opposed to the reserves, are what they call nationalized, and so they become under the control of the president and the federal secretary of defense, as opposed to, like in Australia, the state premier or the town mayor. Okay, so they're transferred from state control to national control. So that's why it's saying, except when they are called into actual service of the United States.
Yes.
It then goes further to say, he shall have the power, once again, he, naughty, naughty, he shall have the power to call forth the militia, which in many states is different from the National Guard, okay?
Yep.
To execute the laws of the state, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions. Okay, so many people may be familiar with, I don't know, cowboy movies, when we had, even when we had Chuck Norris, the movie, it was Walker, Texas Ranger. Do you remember that movie from the late 80s or 90s, right?
Yeah.
So you had the Texas Rangers. That was deemed politically incorrect. So they're now called the Department of Public Safety. Okay,
Right.
but they essentially still exist. They wear the cowboy hats and the white shirt and jeans, and have a pistol on their arm. So he could call up the reserves for them, or they could deputize people, like you would see in a cowboy movie, where they'd say, we need to form a posse to go after the bank robbers. Okay, I mean, we're literally talking, legislation that's like 150 years old in many cases. Okay, or they can, if like California, then they not only have the regular federal forces, they have the federal reserves, they have the state National Guard, which are part-time, like in Britain you'd call them territorials, right? I don't know. I think you have militia in Australia as well, right? In theory,
yeah.
That haven't literally been called up since like the Second World War or something.
Yeah, an army reserve.
Right?
Yep.
And then there's quite a few states, I think about 10, so about 20% of the states, that have what in California is called the California State Reserve, which is the organized militia. Okay. Now, you remember from the Second Amendment that has the preamble to the right to bear arms not being infringed.
Yes.
It says, in order to have a well-regulated militia.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when people say militia in America now, they think of right-wing armed irregular groups. Okay, there's that funny movie with Walter Matthau and Robin Williams where he joins a militia. Okay, that's I can't remember the name of it, but it's Walter Matthau, Robin Williams. It's very, very funny. And so the provision there is basically what in the Napoleonic era would be called a levy en masse. So you literally put out a call, like has happened in Ukraine, and you say, like, every man between the age of 20 and 40 report to your nearest army barracks, and you're going to be given a rifle.
Yep.
Okay. So, because if let's say your, I don't know, Texas Rangers is 10,000 people, and your National Guard is like 20,000 people, and you've got 250,000 people, if you've got to be running 3 shifts a day, that means you've only got 10,000 people. You're outnumbered 50 to 1. All right. Now, there was a report that the Border Patrol were all called in to their sector headquarters to be retrained on implementing and enforcing Title 8. And they took 90% of the on-duty Border Patrol staff off the line, out of the field and into the classroom. Okay? So people were pointing out that at that point, each individual border patrol officer was responsible for 50 kilometers of the border, one person per 50 kilometers.
Wow.
Okay? So, I mean, and lots of people think that Trump built the border wall, but it's not. It's only a few hundred miles of it. So there's not only are there like crazy gaps where, you know, the project got cancelled with a gap of like 200 or 300 meters in the middle that people can just walk through.
Sure.
But where there's like hills or rivers or valleys or whatever, and it was more technically complicated, those just weren't done. So there's like 1,500 miles with no protection whatsoever.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if there's nobody on the other side, then you still just need like a 50-foot ladder to go to the top and a rope to scale down the other side.
That's right.
And we've seen people doing that in entire family groups and stuff now. I mean, you remember that movie World War Z, where he's in Israel and the people are singing and dancing and the zombies are on the other side of the huge wall, and they make that like anthill, and then they all start getting over the wall, and then there's you know, suddenly thousands of the zombies inside what they thought was a secure area.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I'm not saying that these illegal migrants are ants. That's not my point, right? It's, you know, they built a pyramid like ants made, right? It's a simile, not a metaphor. And you know, we're at this point where there is no wall, right? So they don't even have to form a human pyramid.
That's right. Straight through.
It's straight through. Now, if my AUKUS is correct, and there are 20 million displaced people, not currently, so not including all of the ones who are on their way, right? You know, it is a biblical movement of people. And when those people are seen to be not repelled, either physically or procedurally, it is going to induce many millions more to follow their example. And you have to remember that at the time of Brexit, one of the big arguments was a poll that had been done nationwide in Turkey, which has a population of about 80 million people. And it showed that 40% of the country wanted to migrate into Europe. And of that 40%, let's say was 30 million roughly, right? 40% of 80 million is 32 million. So let's just say 30, right? That about 2/3 of those, so 2/3 of 30 is 20, wanted to go to Britain and Germany. So if that was split equally, you're talking about 10 million going to Germany and 10 million going to Britain. Now, already Britain has had somewhere between 7 and 10 million people go into it over the last 20 years. And Germany was overrun, unable to cope when they had a few million go in 2015.
Yep.
Okay? So let's say that Germany's is 80 million. So it's a quarter the size of America.
Yeah.
Right? So if we do a quarter of 20 million, that would be 5 million. So it's like the equivalent of 5 million people turning up within 1 year into Germany. Yeah. Now, Australia is what, 27 million, roughly a third of the size?
Yeah.
Right? So the Australian government are talking about bringing in 720,000.
Something like that, yes.
Right? So if they're a third of Germany, and we've said it's equivalent of 5 million going into Germany, so a third of 5 million is 1.7 million. So that would be not by legal migration, but by illegal migration, say coming in boats from Indonesia or from Sri Lanka, right? Yeah. That obviously, you know, the Howard government and ScoMo and stuff were trying to send all these people to like Christmas Island and Easter Island and stuff, and Norfolk Island. That's like 1.7 million people turning up within 1 year, in addition to legal migration in Australia.
Yes. Yep.
So that puts the numbers for people listening in England and people listening in Australia.
Yeah, well
That's
said.
the scale that we're talking about. And those are, pretty exact comparisons.
And this all should be expected to start Friday morning, literally from 12:01 in the morning, Friday morning US time. Simon, we've way over time, and a couple of stories I want to cover before we go. And the big one is James Comer, House Republicans allege Biden family members received millions in payments from foreign entities in new bank records report. This is a massive story that many of us are waiting with bated breath to see if this is going to tie in not only the Hunter Biden story, but Joe Biden himself. Can you tell us more? And this was even reported on CNN.
Yeah. So that is a investigation committee which is pretty much all Republicans of the House of Representatives, and they had whistleblower information that there was what was called SARs, which are suspicious activity reports of basically odd-looking financial transactions that the licensed American banks are required to file, particularly for transactions over $10,000. And particularly if they've come from overseas countries, even more so if they're countries under sanctions like North Korea or Iran or Venezuela, for example, right? They had learned that there were many, many suspicious activity reports relating to companies that were either controlled by Biden family members or were controlled by known associates of Biden family members. To date, they've only looked at the reports from 4 out of the 12 large banks that are alleged to have filed these type of reports. Now, they've now identified 17 companies, 16 of which were created whilst President Biden was vice president. So this is the period like 2008 to 2016 before Trump came in, right?
Yes.
And the actual total amount is relatively small. It is being distributed to 9 family members, 3 of which were young children at the time. Okay. And why would a young child be getting like tens of thousands of dollars? Now, I guess you could put it into like a trust fund or something, but not from Romania or China or Ukraine. That's a very odd source for trust money to be going to a 7 or 8 year old.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the people are pointing out that the total amount identified so far is only $10 million being split. If you include the vice president at the time, 10 ways, so it's only $1 million each. And how cheap were they selling out his significant political influence? Because you have to bear in mind that he was the presidential envoy to Ukraine, and he was also doing a lot of shuttle diplomacy with China. So he wasn't just the vice president; he also had additional roles, like Kamala Harris has been given the additional roles regarding immigration. She's supposed to be the immigration czar, and she's now also supposed to be the czar on controlling artificial intelligence.
Yes,
Kamala
that's right.
Harris is right now
Yes.
in her additional roles to being vice president, right? So that's another thing to tie back to the immigration situation, because not only is Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, looking grossly incompetent, but so is Kamala Harris, because lots of governments are now coming out publicly because they don't want to get the blame for what happens this weekend, saying we have been warning Kamala Harris and the American government for weeks that groups of like 50,000 people, 60,000 people, whatever, have been walking through our country. Okay? Now, So the Republicans are very much saying that the financial investigation into Biden is the tip of the iceberg, and there's all kinds of things that Hunter Biden is in trouble with, both for stiffing his stripper ex-girlfriend, mother of his child, one of his children, on child support, and fraud on his income tax, and drug use, and buying a firearm and dumping it, and all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, you've got to remember that President Biden had two brothers, one of which I think is now dead. He had two sons, one of which is dead, and a daughter. He had a sister. He has a wife. He has an ex-wife who's dead. And then he's got many nieces, nephews, and grandchildren. Quite a large, Catholic-style family tree. Plus, all of those people have got people that they've been doing business dealings with for 20 or 30 years. So that there's a real large network to unravel. Now, there's obviously the journalist, who I think his name is Peter Schweizer, who published the book making all these allegations in the run-up to the 2020 elections. He's rather frustrated, and I think justifiably so, saying, hang on a second, I told you people all about this 3 years ago. Like, not a lot of this is new. What he wasn't able to enforce was subpoena powers, insisting that the banks hand over copies of the records that they had previously given to the federal government. Because obviously when they send this kind of stuff, they always keep a copy to prove they did what they were supposed to do.
Yep.
So, we have got this potential unraveling. There is the expectation that Hunter Biden is going to be charged with a number of offenses, but it appears that they are simultaneously going to announce that he's admitting to X, Y, and Z, and he's going to get a suspended prison sentence and 3 or 4 years probation. So he's not going to do 1 day of jail time, where obviously he would have to be protected by the Secret Service. So he'd probably go into some kind of open prison and have his own building, right? And he's not even going to get house arrest to rifle through all the secret documents in his dad's garage. But instead, he'll be having to report to a probation officer once a week. And if he doesn't get arrested for anything else for 2 or 3 years, then he'll never have to serve out his suspended sentence. That's what it looks like is going to happen with regard to Hunter Biden.
There you go. Well, you wouldn't expect anything more, would you, when you've got the whole world going after people like Imran Khan and Donald Trump?
But in the meantime, Trump's facing all kinds of criminal charges, and he's been found liable for sexual assault and defamation. And he has to give this woman $5 million. Now, her lawyers have been talking today, saying that they think that he really doesn't have good grounds for appeal, particularly since he refused to testify in his own defense. And in civil cases, as opposed to criminal cases, the jury is allowed to draw an inference from the refusal to testify. Now, you still got the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination, which applies to both criminal and civil, right? This is when you see people in movies saying, I take the Fifth.
Yes.
Or I plead the Fifth, or on the advice of my attorney, I'm asserting my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, right? That's the long version of it. But in a criminal case, there is no inference whatsoever. They have to just only consider the information that's been put before them. But in cases of defamation, or in proceedings like Alex Jones went through, if they refuse to testify on their own behalf, then the jury is allowed to think that looks jolly dodgy, so they're probably guilty. So they played the deposition, which was like the interview before trial of Trump. It was only like 50 minutes long. But he didn't actually take the stand within the courtroom to testify. So that makes it harder for him to then appeal the outcome, because he didn't avail himself of all the opportunities available to him at the time.
No, I understand. Now, George Santos is a name that not everyone is familiar with. I'm going to put up a picture on the screen here. This is a very interesting story. It just keeps getting deeper and deeper. This is a character who was elected in New York State, a US representative, denies fraud and money laundering charges, Simon.
So he seems, before the 2022 midterm elections, to have generated an entirely fake history, literally like a fake life for a government CIA spy. Right, almost
Yes.
no aspect of his history, upon close examination, stands up to inquiry. Now, this has been incredibly embarrassing for both the state and the National Republican Party, where you would think somebody who was trying to get elected into the US House of Representatives not only would be subject to scrutiny by the media, but also by the voters, but also by the local and national political party to make sure that they're not, promoting a wife beater or a tax fraud or a government agent from another country, right? And there's some salacious allegations that he was doing like gay pornography when he lived in Brazil, that he's homosexual, though neither of those would necessarily be disqualifying legally, right? But he's now been charged with 13 felonies relating not only to unemployment benefit fraud, but also to using political campaign distributions to literally pay for every aspect of his daily life, including like rent and car lease and food and just everything, right? And, campaign contributions are supposed to be used for campaigning. You may be able to bill like a restaurant meal or a hotel whilst you're on the road, so to speak, meeting your constituents, but not to pay for the apartment where you live for a year or to pay for your wife's car or something like that. Okay, so it's very embarrassing and has been a long-running sore. And amazingly, that whilst he's been censured by the state party, he hasn't actually been expelled from the state or national Republican Party. A lot of people are saying now to the Speaker of the House and the chairman of the Republican National Committee, surely at this point he has to just step down. Okay, but because they've got a wafer-thin parliamentary majority, and he is following the whip instructions, they've said, we've got the presumption of innocence, which is legally true, though it's a public relations disaster, and he won't actually be expelled either from the state party or removed as a sitting member of the House of Representatives until he's criminally convicted. Right. So he could drag this out for quite some time, but it's almost inconceivable that he would be re-elected in 2024, and so that's a very likely seat loss because he was in a marginal area where he kind of like beat out a very strong Democratic candidate who one frankly has to feel quite sorry for at this point, that he lost to an outright fraudster. But it just goes to show, as with the strange machinations in Australia, where old Morrison, unbeknownst to many, had that incredible number of government official positions.
Yes.
That sometimes you have, quite senior people and the media just drop the ball.
Yes.
Now, sometimes it's just flat out incompetence. Sometimes it's well-constructed fraud, and sometimes it's a political bias. And clearly, we saw that with the incredible amount of slack that was given to Joe Biden and his family, despite many people coming out making detailed allegations against them. In particular, we had the Biden laptop, and there's still recriminations about that, about all the members and former members of the top security services, 51 of them, who were induced by the former director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, to co-sign a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story was all the product of Russian disinformation.
Yes.
And they were commenting on something about which they didn't have any first-hand knowledge, and were, simply doing either favors or returning favors. Because you have to remember that lots of these people get put on company boards to get government contracts or get given university professorships as soon as they leave political office.
Yes.
And those positions are very much dependent upon them, continuing to play the game. And, it wasn't a handful of them, it was 50. And all of them all still have super secret security clearances.
Indeed, yes.
The reason why they have all those super secret security clearances is not just a courtesy. It's because in these universities and companies, they effectively become part of think tanks and advisory boards. And it's very convenient when the government wants a preordained answer, as they did after 9/11, to be able to go to these national security advisory boards where they've placed all these individuals and say, we're thinking of invading Iraq. What do you think? And they get 10 generals and CIA directors say, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea, and they're super dodgy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what they did in the case of that laptop. And you have to remember that they were terrified that Joe Biden was going to be crucified on that subject in the public debate that he had upcoming with candidate Trump.
That's right.
And he literally had that letter in his pocket to be able to say, that story is complete BS, and here's 50 great and good who have said that it's Russian disinformation. And that got him off the hook from that very potentially damaging point in the debate. So it was done with a specific purpose.
Is that not election interference?
These people, none of these people have resigned.
No, that's right. But isn't this exactly what we call election interference?
Well, one could argue that it is. Now, they're saying, well, it was a matter of opinion, and under the First Amendment, I'm entitled to my opinion. But they were really saying, as the ex-director of the FBI or the CIA or the DHS or the DIA, in my expert 40-year opinion, I'm telling you that this is definitely Russian propaganda. So if they're going to get that wrong, then should they be treated to give advice about whether or not to, give F-16s to Ukraine, for example? One would argue that even if they're not prosecuted, that they should resign in shame.
Correct. Absolutely. Simon, again, well over time. Last story I want to cover today before we wrap up is what happened in Moscow at the meeting between Iran, Syria, Turkey and the Russians. Can you just fill us in briefly, because we expected, and we talked about that in a previous show, that it was coming up?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of things in the Middle East that we need to cover. There's clearly the situation in Gaza, okay? So the Israeli Air Force is bombing the heck out of Gaza and have so far killed over 20 people, okay? Yep. The Arab League has condemned that. The European Union has condemned it. The British and the Americans, as usual, are extremely kind of, oh, the Israelis have got to defend themselves. It only seems to be Islamic Jihad fighting back from the Palestinians, though there is an argument that tonight Hamas joined them in shooting rockets. About 300 rockets were fired from Gaza into southern Israel, but mainly the town of Sderot. But so far, nothing from the West Bank or from southern Lebanon. Okay? Now, it appears that the Egyptians have managed to negotiate a ceasefire. The problem is they've done that twice before, and the Israelis have not only violated the ceasefire, but joked about violating the ceasefire, because we had a meeting that was organized by the Jordanians with the Egyptians and I believe American representative at that occasion in Aqaba. Then we had the other one a few weeks later in Sharm el Sheikh, in the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And Ben Gvir, for example, was saying that there's an advert that they have in America that what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. And they mean that in terms of like getting drunk or gambling or having an affair. It's a very seedy advert, right?
Yes.
But one that is into the popular zeitgeist. It's one that people make memes about, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the national security minister of the Israeli government joked, "What happened in Aqaba stays in Aqaba." He literally mocked the ceasefire agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So people don't have very much confidence for this third ceasefire agreement in the space of 10 weeks.
Yep.
So we'll have to monitor that and see what that happens. But that situation is quite stinky, and the Arab League has got involved and the Organization of Islamic Countries. But unfortunately, both of those are widely despised in the Islamic world as being very much toothless paper tigers.
Sure.
Okay, so there hasn't really been much direct assistance. The Saudis are saying that they're reopening their embassy in Syria. The Iranians have gone to Iraq together. They're now trying to do deal about joint oil investments. The Israeli foreign minister flew back from India to Israel, and he has been very busy, so he was needed. He's been dealing with both the Egyptians and with the Americans and with the Europeans regarding the military situation there. Then in Moscow, we've had, and I believe this is the third quad meeting of the foreign ministers of Iran and Russia and Syria and Turkey.
Yes.
The Chinese didn't show up. And I believe the reason why the Chinese didn't show up was because there was an indication that they weren't going to reach a final agreement. And that turned out to be correct.
Yes.
So they had a lot of bilateral meetings. They had a half-day quadrilateral meeting. They all, unlike last time when the Syrians basically walked out and said that the Turks have to set the timetable to withdraw. Now, the Turks now have not set a date, but they've guaranteed that they will withdraw, and they have no territorial ambitions on the land of Syria in the long run. So that was enough for the meeting to actually go ahead. Okay? So
Yes.
they've all come out saying we've made progress. It was all very collegial. Nobody punched each other. And we're definitely going to have another meeting. Okay? So there was no overall conclusion. And I think just like we saw with the deal between the Iranians and the Saudis, the Chinese only want to be there for the celebration.
Right.
They don't really want to be publicly involved during the process. Now, their ambassadors may be involved. They may be making phone calls. They may be sending emails, but they don't want to be seen doing anything that fails.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I wouldn't call today a failure, but it's kind of like step 4 of a 10-step process. So put it like that. Okay. And frankly, the Chinese are now busy because they've had their foreign minister going around the European countries, and they've had their vice president go to Holland and Portugal.
Yep.
Their tours are due to end on the 12th, which is obviously Friday, right?
Yep.
And then we've had quite a big to-do with the German foreign minister. she's the one who's like all in on Ukraine, despite being a member of the Green Party that was previously pacifist, but now they're most definitely not. They're super, super pro-Ukraine. And she told the Chinese foreign minister to his face in public that China could not remain neutral, and that if they didn't side with Ukraine, then they were taking a position against the victim. And she did that in public. Okay, that's now the second time she's done that to him, because she did that in Beijing as well. So what was interesting is that wasn't reported in China at all. They just like completely glossed over that bit. Like if they showed it televised, then it got cut out.
Right.
Because I was comparing like the press conference with subtitles to the German press release, to the version that was on like People's Daily and Xinhua and Global Times, and it was like very, very noticeable that it wasn't just a question of the Chinese statement being 3 times as long.
Yep.
Like that key point was just out, but the tone was quite adversarial. So last time Scholz backtracked and apologized and delayed the publication of the Sino-German strategic relationship. Now they've got a 20-year anniversary coming up with the strategic partnership with the European Union, and they've also got another anniversary coming up with the German government. Qin Gang, the Chinese foreign minister, has said that he hopes that the situation can be improved at those higher level diplomatic events, basically saying that he hopes that the president and chancellor of Germany have got more common sense than their foreign minister,
right?
Who both the foreign minister and the defense minister of Germany, like the Americans, are going on the George Bush style. You're either with us or you're against us. Okay.
Yeah.
But like even Australian commentators, I'm noting, you've got the ASPI and you've got the Lowry Institute, right? Are saying things like, do we really want to force China to publicly make a choice?
Yes.
Like, even if we don't trust them, and even if they're sanction breaking a bit, they haven't sent 100,000 troops and they haven't sent 5,000 tanks. Okay? And if you say to them, F you, Mr. Chinaman, you've got to make a choice, and they say, we're going all in with Russia, how are you left? What do you do next? I mean, that looks pretty damn stupid, right?
Of course.
Because they're not going to side with Germany. If you force them to jump left or right, rather than trying to walk down the middle along the fence line, they're going to back the Russians. And, there aren't many European countries that are up for a fight against Chinese special forces.
Indeed.
In hundreds of thousands.
Absolutely. Goodness me, we watch with bated breath as the West just seems to be caught up in delusions of grandeur as it's collapsing, the Western Empire, as we're noticing. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the impending border crisis that is not just about 24 hours away, the arrest of Imran Khan and other political operatives of his party. We've seen the Biden catastrophe that's playing out here with Hunter Biden, the business dealings, and the speculation that Hunter Biden will be at worst given some time sitting at home on a suspended sentence if it all sort of comes out. And many people are just completely frustrated with the goings on. But it continues, and Simon is here bringing us great detail so you can understand in real time what is going on. We're going to conclude this show today there, and I'm just going to play a clip of Imran Khan on the cricket field for those that are wondering why it seems that Pakistan has created an uprising where their former Prime Minister and cricket captain has been put, literally been taken into custody and facing 148 different charges at this time in a country renowned for its corruption. It's truly, truly extraordinary times. Thanks, Simon, and I look forward to speaking with you again on the next show when we get back and put this detail all together. But we'll conclude here with the pictures of Imran Khan on the cricket field.
Been bowled. Oh, he's bowled him. That's hit the leg stump.
And knocks off stump right out of the ground.
Solidly held that. Beautiful boundary. Oh, that's a big shot.
It's hit high in the air, going down towards extra cover, and they won't get that one. Into the crowd. What a shot. That's 6. Is it that miles? That has gone miles. It is a huge